we interrupt this program to bring you the Design Hustle podcast, conversations around successful design journeys. Take it away, Ali.
Welcome back to the Design Hustle podcast, everyone. I just got done speaking with Joe Natoli, a UX consultant, coach, speaker, author, and founder of the UX365 Academy. What a session we had. Our conversation revolved around his extensive journey in the UX and design field, the importance of curiosity, the evolution of graphic design, and the challenges faced in the educational system. We also discussed his transition from traditional graphic design to the digital world, the role of fear in pursuing one's passions, and how he became a consultant and an educator. And this is what he had to say. Joe Natoli, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for saying yes. And just before we went online, I was just appreciating the fact that, anyone who's in the UX field and who doesn't know your name is probably been sleeping under a rock or something, because you are absolutely everywhere. So you Google UX, you come in, you go to YouTube, you come in, podcasts, you had a channel before. Even now, somehow you show up on all these discussions. Then you've got an academy, you are an author, a new book is also coming out from you.
Yes.
We'll talk about that. You are a speaker and a consultant, a B2B as well and a B2C as well. And so what do you identify as?
I identify as eternally curious, I think. I'm a consultant, teacher, trainer, coach. I'm a designer to some degree, as well, author, speaker. There's a lot that interests me, and to me, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. I could not, if you forced me to pick one of those things and say, all right, you can only do one thing going forward, I would lose my mind. I mean, my head would probably explode. I don't know how to do just one aspect of any of those things because they all interest me greatly. They all give me a great sense of joy, I think, mainly because they all accomplish the same goal, which is helping people on the receiving end. And that's something that's deepened throughout my career. The thing that gets me up in the morning really is the people on the receiving end. I noticed a trend about 15 years ago or so, probably longer than that, where it stopped being so much about the end product that I was called in, to help improve. And it really became more about the people in that room, the product designers, the developers, the product managers, even the VPs, the executives, everybody. It became about people. All right. Not only are we trying to help people on the receiving end, obviously customers, users, whatever, but these are all humans and they're all struggling and they're all dealing with obstacles and there are things in their way, and you start to feel like, okay, I'm able to help them move some of that stuff aside and get through it and have less stress and have less strife and put better things out into the world as a byproduct of that. So that's the thing about all these things, from the books to the speaking, to the academy, to consulting with clients. It all accomplishes the same goal, which is, am I putting things out there into the world that help people? That's the way I approach social media, for better or worse. I don't want to open my mouth unless I feel like somebody is going to gain from it, even if I'm promoting something, because let's face it, if you have a business, you have to promote it. That is part of the deal if you want to make money and pay bills. But even when I do that, I feel like that should be a give to get. I should give you something first that's useful to you before I hold out my hand and say, it'd be really cool if you join the academy, or it'd be really cool if you bought this book or whatever it is. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. All right. But I'm definitely all those things, and I don't know how to not be all those things.
I hear you, because I think from the other side, so my understanding of my sort of vision of you sort of changed over the years, because I think I discovered you back in 2020 when I officially, formally started doing a lot of UX stuff. Before I was doing it, but informally doing it, like, UI-ish work.
Sure.
And then I started seeing that version of you where you were trying to decode or demystify what UX was. Right? Right.
Yes.
So before we get into the UX part of it, I'd just love to know a little bit more about you. Maybe were you curious as a kid? How did you get started? Like, what's the story here?
I think I was always that way. I was diagnosed with ADD probably in my somewhere in my mid 40s. Now, had anybody known this as a kid, I mean, my childhood probably would have gone very differently, at least academically. It was very difficult for me to focus on one thing at a time, always. I started to draw at a very early age. I had artistic talent from the time I could hold a pen. And when I was in school, I remember this distinctly from early years in grade school, all the way through. I used to draw like on my homework. I used to draw on my paper. I used to draw on tests, right? Because I would finish a lot of times early and I would sit there and I would literally draw on the test and teachers would be like, you can't do this. You're not supposed to do this. And I was like, why? I mean, I want to do this, so why not? And that's kind of how it was. Like I would draw on anything that didn't move. When I discovered music, I mean, that was mind blowing to me. I'm very musically obsessive. People who follow me on Blue Sky, I reserve that channel exclusively for music and nerd stuff.
Okay.
I don't do any UX there on purpose, but, same kind of thing, it was like that with movies. I was very into science fiction and horror movies as a kid, comic books. It was all this input, like I couldn't get enough. Is kind of how I felt, and I sort of loved the idea of being interested in all of it. And I grew up in a way where I kind of felt different from my friends in that respect. It's interesting where this is going. In that people had certain interests, like I'm into this, like this one thing is my thing. It's sports or, it's football or it might be music, but it's most of the people that I knew kind of had one thing that they did and there were sort of rules around that. If you belonged to this club, you couldn't belong to this club. If you were in this social group, you couldn't belong to this social group. I never understood that. I don't understand it to this day. Punk rock and metal came about when I got a little bit older, my exposure to those things. And it was the same kind of thing. To me, both things represented freedom. Like you can be whoever you want. You can be into whatever you want. It's all good. Everybody's welcome. And then you sort of find out that there are people in both groups that are like, well, no, that's not really punk rock, or that's not really. And I'm like I had Elton John records, in addition to my Iron Maiden records. And people were like, well, you can't do that. I'm like, why not? So that to me is symptomatic of how I look at the world and how I've always conducted myself. It all counts. It's all valuable. It all matters. I don't believe in these divisions. As if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that, right? Because I'm carping about it all the time, particularly as it relates to UX and design. These walls, these rules around this is the right thing and that's the wrong thing, to me are just the dumbest, most constraining, unnecessarily constraining way to go about your life. So in a long-winded way, I guess what I'm trying to get to is I've always been that person. Like you, I've started other businesses. Okay. I started a book publishing company. I ran an independent record label for 2.5 years. I have started 3 magazines, one with a co-founder and a partner. All sorts of stuff. I've been in bands off and on since I was 15, which I kind of quit doing about 5 or 6 years ago. Now I just play. I write and compose a lot of music, arrange a lot of music for myself, which eventually will see the light of day. This is the point, right? I don't know how to live any other way than to just bring it all in and say, all right, what do I want to do here? Within reason, of course. You have to live a life. You have to pay bills. You have a family. But I can't cut any of those things off. It's not possible.
I totally, I get you, because I think I can relate to when it comes to you having this thirst for adventures, right? So
Yeah.
just before we were talking about this idea that I've been obsessed with Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey.
Hero's journey.
And it's always been, maybe because I'm from the East and we're more narrative based, we like stories. That's how it's in our blood, right? You look at
Yeah.
Bollywood and all those overly exaggerated, there's always like a good and a bad, and
Well, and I
winners
grew up
and
that way. I'm
losers.
Sicilian. Both sides of my
Yeah.
family are Sicilian. So
Really?
It's,
Okay.
yeah, it's very embedded in the same way. So I completely get what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. So, but somewhere down the line, right, as you said, like we need to decide what we want to do, right? And when you're part of an official, let's say, an educational system that you were perhaps in the US, then what did you decide to do? Like, what was that decision like?
It was a terribly restrictive system, and I think it still is. I think education in this country is poor, to say the least, and really short-sighted. And not because of the teachers, okay? I think I've met a lot of teachers at grade school level. I've taught university part-time for a very long time. There are a lot of teachers who care a great deal about educating their students. They're working with one hand tied behind their back, which is really unfortunate. So that was kind of my experience growing up. I was fortunate enough to have some really good teachers who saw my ability and said, you kind of need to look beyond the options that are in front of you. By way of example, my 8th grade teacher, Sally Zubik, was like that. I had an art teacher in high school, Sam Fatchman, who was like that, who said, look, you can be more.
Mm-hmm.
My high school guidance counselor, who you're supposed to go to for career advice, right? This person is supposed to help you decide what the trajectory of your career is going to be. I went to him and I said, look, I have artistic talent, obviously. I think I want to do something with that, but I don't know what that is. He looked at me and he said, well, some people are better off taking orders from other people. So his thing was I should go to the Army. They would give me some discipline and sort of set me straight on a path. Like, in other words, you're a dreamer, grow up, get real, be responsible. I have no problem with the Army or the Navy or military or anything like that. But it was a terrible way to say to somebody, look, here's where your strengths are. Here's what you're really good at. Here are the options. Graphic design was never an option. This guy didn't even know it existed, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. Okay. So my father wanted me to be an architect, actually, because he felt like his brother was an architect, my uncle. And he felt like, okay, you can make money and it's creative and you seem to have a knack for this kind of stuff. And I was interested in it. But then randomly, I discovered this thing called graphic design in a catalog, Kent State University catalog. And I read it and I thought, man, this sounds like me. This sounds like me, because I was even in high school, I was designing with typography, with letter forms. Now, I didn't know what that was. I didn't know it was a discipline or that was called typography or anything like that, but that's what I was doing. So sure enough, I take one class my first year of college and I'm hooked. That's it. This wonderful woman named Katie Kennedy was my first instructor in college, and she was a force of nature, just on fire, really passionate and committed. And like, she just pushed us all the time, to be like, this is amazing that we get to do this, and I was sold. And that was it. So once, from there, like, to me, the way we were taught design, back to the conversation you and I were having before we started with architecture and everything else, to me, and I've said this publicly, design is design is design is design is design. It's about what happens up here. I don't care what the output is. If it's software, if it's a building, if it's a physical product you hold in your hand, it's all design, period. I believe in the Massimo Vignelli school of thought, which is, if you can design one thing well, you can design anything well. I firmly believe that.
I think that's really cool, because I walk in between a lot of different people, and they're all designers of different backgrounds, I would say, because architects are very formally trained, so they'd like to stick with architects because they like to talk about high design, different things. Then graphic design, which became communication design by the time we were growing up, because
Yeah.
sort of expanded, right? So
Yeah.
then I've got those friends, and then I've got the UX friends because they like to be in the tech world, and and I keep telling them, like, for me, it's very difficult to draw lines in between, because I'm pretty much like you. I close my eyes and I see something that I like, and I'm like, can I imagine myself doing this?
Yes.
And if it's solving a problem, it's something that I am interested in as well. And if it's something that somehow requires my design thinking toolbox, right? Say, and not design thinking the design thinking, but basically the way designers think.
Correct. Correct.
Toolbox, then I can perhaps find a way to understand how to solve that problem. This is how I see it.
I agree.
And if someone is willing to pay for it, that's perfectly fine. Like, that's great. But so once you became, like, you got into graphic design, and now you're graduating, and now you're looking at graphic design companies, perhaps, or
Yeah.
advertising agencies.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct. And that's what happened. I worked for, I started interning at an ad agency in Ohio that was local to me my junior year. I was working there for most of my senior year because I had a lighter class load. I worked there for another half year. I was looking for jobs in New York and Long Island and Connecticut because the woman I was dating at the time lived out that way. Didn't happen. Wound up in Baltimore just because on the off chance I came to see a friend of mine who was already living there. And he called me the night before and he said, I think my company's hiring. Bring some decent clothes and bring your portfolio. Because he knew I was looking. 4 weeks later, they had flown me there twice. This was Merry-Go-Round, it was a clothing corporation, but they had an in-house headquarters, massive design department. They owned like 6 chains of stores, retail stores. And they flew me out and said, we want to hire you. So a week later, I was moving to Baltimore. So worked there, jumped to a graphic design, small design boutique, advertising and design agency. From there, I went to Donor, which was one of the largest agencies in the world at the time. And that was right around the time this little thing called the World Wide Web happened, the internet, right? And I could not convince, I was like, this is amazing. And that's when it was black text on gray backgrounds, right? There was nothing to it. And I thought, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen, because probably like you're seeing past that, and not because I don't say this because I felt like I'm like a visionary or something. I just could see the possibilities and it was exciting. You don't quite know what it is, but you just know that this opens up a whole new can of worms, so to speak. And I could not convince the old guys that ran this agency that this wasn't a passing fad, a trend. Like, to them, it was like, it's just another newfangled thing that's going to pass. And I'm like, I don't think so, because we're watching it evolve, and it's evolving really quickly, right? It went from black text on gray backgrounds to now we've got images. Now we've got things that animate. Now, and it's evolving at this weirdly fast pace. So I was brave enough or dumb enough or arrogant enough, or, choose your adjective, to say, well, I'm going to design for the web. I'm going to jump ship. I'm going to go do my own thing. Now, I had no idea what I was doing. Zero. But again, it's that innate curiosity and this sort of weird belief that, like, well, I can do that. So I took one person with me as an employee, and that's what we started doing. And it was the Wild West. I tell this story all the time, is nobody knew how to do anything, which was the really cool part about it. So now you've got all these companies going, do you know how to do this thing for, websites, or this thing for this? Like when SaaS became a thing, that was new. There was no rules. There were no rules attached to that. I remember there's a local development firm that popped up. It's 3 guys down the street from where I had opened my office. And I would hang out with these guys at lunch and we would compare notes. And it was cool because we were all just like, have you ever done this? Like, I have no idea. Someone just asked me last week if we know how to do A, B, and C, and we got to figure it out. Right. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the Bill Gates thing where it was like, oh yeah, we can do that. Absolutely. And then you had to figure out how to do it and get it done because you made a promise. So for a lot of people, that sounds incredibly stressful. For me, it was right where I wanted to be. And it's crazy in a way, okay, to put yourself in this position. But I guess I've kind of done that over and over and over again. And the one thing I want to make sure that I say is that people get this idea that to live your life that way requires fearlessness. There's no such thing. Okay, you go through like the hero's journey thing, right? Facing your demons and your hell and all that kind of stuff. That's a continuous cycle. You are constantly in situations where you feel more fear than you know what to do with. You take the step anyway, right? You go forward anyway, in spite of that. I mean, that's what courage is. Courage is, I'm scared shitless right now. But I don't know how to not go forward. Like this thing that I feel like I need in some way, or I want in some way, is there. And I think that's true of anything in life. If anything is ever going to stop you, it's going to be fear. Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
and you got to push through it. There is no other choice. People get this mistaken idea that makes you, I don't know, more than, better than, like you have to be some kind of, I mean, the problem with hero's journey is the word hero's in there.
I hear you. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not about being a hero. It's about just acknowledging reality and saying, look, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I got to figure it out. I think that life is full of those moments. And I think that we don't talk about that enough. Social media certainly does not talk about that enough because you get to see people's glorified lives. You get to see all the great stuff, right? It's all perfect and idealized and it's well lit, you know, and it's just not reality. There's a lot of slogging through the mud. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, geez, I don't know if I can do this. To this day, I still have interactions like with a new client or something where it's complex. You know, I work with government, for example. I mean, the complexity, there are plenty of moments like on a day one where you're absorbing all this stuff, you know, through the fire hose. And I swear, that thought in your brain is always going, holy crap, like, what am I getting myself into here? It's intimidating. You know, and the only thing you can do, especially the longer you've gone on, is that the good fortune that you have is that you can look at everything that's transpired up to now and you say, well, if I could do that, I can do this.
Trust the process, as they say. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you've done it once, and it's always the same, right? And there's always fear at the start, and then you're like, fight or flight, a moment.
Yeah.
Where you're like, you know, is this client even worth it, right? So maybe I can find someone else, right? Just let's, So, I know the feeling. I've changed countries. I've stopped very good positions in the middle and said, like, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I've stopped contracts in the middle, and I said, this is not the company culture that I want to be part of, or I want to be associated with. So all these things. And, you know, of course, like I'm in a country where German is the normal language, and now it's a third language that I have to learn, where I still like to say that English is still the second language I'm trying to speak, right? And just because there are a billion of us, technically, including the Indians and Pakistanis who speak this way, then I understand that a lot of people have to understand how we speak, because that's how it is, because there's so many numbers out there.
And your English is perfect, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's because my wife is Dutch, so we've got a huge mix of cultures, people, accents, languages, backgrounds. You know, and I think that gives me the confidence every single time to just take the step. I'm always scared, as you said. I always have the imposter syndrome every single time I do something. And I'm like, it's okay to have it. If I don't have it, then there's something wrong.
I agree with you.
So, okay.
I have it. I've had it all my life. That's never not been a thing. That voice on my shoulder that says, you have no idea what you're doing. People are going to find out you're a fraud. that's always there.
Mm-hmm.
Always.
But how did you then, so I'm trying to make this connection of someone who's now finding work in the market because the market is new. You are maybe at the cutting edge of how things are being done because there are no processes established, formal processes. No, there's no design ops per se.
Yeah.
You're basically coming up with ops. And then you somehow decide to become a consultant, have an academy. What's the thinking process behind that? Like, because that's like, it's risky.
Yeah. A lot of that credit goes to, on the consulting side. Okay. A lot of that credit goes to my wife. When I was at the tail end of my company, okay, I worked with her as a freelancer. I'd never seen her face for like 2 years. And she is a lot of things. I mean, she's a business consultant right now for entrepreneurs, but she started life as a project manager, but with an incredible strategic head. She's a developer as well, which is the capacity that we were working together in. And so then after we met and then we became a couple and then we decided to start our own company together to do design for software and web and all this kind of stuff. So we did that, but there was a moment in time when she said to me, I remember it was right after I sold my company to an IT firm, and we both sort of hung out there for a couple of years to try and help them establish a UX and design practice, which turns out they weren't interested in. But she said to me,
is this Give Good UX that we're talking about now? Or
that was Twofold. That was a company called Twofold.
Okay, right.
So she said to me, do you realize the way people react to you when you're sort of in teaching mode? When you're in the room? And she pointed it out to me. She said, everybody's body language changes. People pay attention to what you say and how you say it. So, I mean, there needs to be a bigger component of that. And I went, oh, okay. So I deliberately started to try to be more consultative. I think that was my nature to some degree, because even my proposals for projects were like ridiculously long, and there's an education in every proposal. Like, this is what design is. This is how it works. This is why it matters. This is why we're proposing the things that we are, because blah, blah, blah. Not from a place of arrogance, just from a place of, I want to make sure that you understand what I'm trying to do for you. But she pointed it out to me. She said, you really need to do more of this. That was the first thing. The second thing was she got wind of Udemy when it first started. She said, there's this thing called Udemy, and people post videos and they teach. And she's like, you have 10,000 client presentations, PowerPoints, and all sorts of stuff, and they're incredibly detailed. Take one of them and let's develop a course around it and let's see what happens. So I did. It was just voiceover and slides, essentially. So we put it out there. And okay, a couple hundred people sign up. All right, cool. Then it's like 1,000. And we're like, all right. And then it grows to 3,000 and 5, and then it goes up. And we're like, holy shit, like something is happening here. So that was the beginning of teaching on Udemy, right? With a lot of students very fast and a couple more courses onward. So now I'm doing more consulting work and I'm doing Udemy, and I've been a writer as long as I've been alive, right? So then that transitioned into, well, maybe I should write some books, a couple self-published things, and then Think First, which was also self-published, but kind of made a pretty big impact. So I credit her for having a vision that I didn't have, right? She was able to look at what I was doing very objectively and saying, look, your strengths are here. You should be doing more of these things. And that continues to this day, by the way. She wrote a book and I wrote the foreword to it. And in that foreword, I said, you need to understand that Ellie built the ground that I walk on. Yeah. Okay. Because the part that I do, I obviously know how to do very well. But in terms of having a bigger vision and seeing the path, we've talked about this, right? I'm like all over the place. I'm like a dog, like squirrel, It's everything excites me, and I want I want to go off in 10 different directions. And she's like, no, stay here, do these things.
Yeah.
So that's invaluable. All right. There's no way none of this would happen. Any of this would happen without her. So fast forward however many years later, all right, consulting with Fortune 500 and 100 organizations, government agencies, names that people recognize. We're at last count, all right, and I just looked, I think it was Monday. It's like 375,000 students total at this point, and it keeps growing. Where was I going with all this? You asked me a question and then I went
Yeah, no, I think it's a perfect, I think, because the segue is now that you started off with Udemy, right? And
Yeah.
you capitalized on a platform that was already there. And you were like, okay, so if I make a course, 2 courses, 10 courses, and then somehow this decision was made where you branched off into your own academy, which
yeah.
So 365,
UX365, yeah.
UX365, yeah.
The impetus there is that, I mean, if you look at what's on Udemy, it's sort of basic UX kind of stuff. And I'm starting, to veer off into, okay, well, there's more to it than that. How you go about your day-to-day job, how you deal with difficulty, how you deal with difficult clients. I mean, that was a component of all my courses, right? Here's reality. In addition to all this principle and process stuff, here's the reality of the other human beings that you're going to work with. Here's the reality of politics inside a corporate environment. And I learned all this by the broken nose method, by the way. All right. You learn the hard way. You do it repeatedly because you're like, why isn't this working? And finally, some part of your brain clicks and goes, oh, okay, now I get it. Don't do this instead. So I started to increasingly feel like the longer I was doing Udemy and the longer I was in contact with students, right, and I'm coaching and I'm doing all these other things, and the more I'm in contact, even with product teams, right, that I'm consulting with, I started to feel like what is truly missing. There's a missing chunk of education that needs to happen with people in this profession that they don't get anywhere. And that is how to deal with politics, how to deal with dysfunction, how to deal with the times when there isn't enough time or budget, or you don't have the approval to do the work, or no, you can't talk to users at all. We're not allowing you to talk to customers because we're scared and we're keeping everything close to our vest. There's all sorts of things that you encounter, working with developers, working with product managers. There are all these things that you encounter on a daily basis that no one talks about. This is insane. You're not taught how to present properly or speak publicly when you have to convince people that your way is the right way. Even researchers, okay, the way that they're taught to do their work and present it is diametrically opposed to how those people on the receiving end, from a product manager standpoint to a VP of product standpoint to an executive, C-level executive standpoint, the way that they're taught to do it and the way it needs to be done are two completely different things, right? And there's a ton of that in this work. So I started feeling like there needs to be a place where that is the focus, right? I want people to get an education that they can't get anywhere else, but that they, should be getting somewhere else. It was really increasingly frustrating to me that none of these boot camps, none of these programs that they're charging $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 are not even grazing the surface of this stuff. And that's the majority of the shit that you deal with every day. That's crazy to me. It's insane. All right. And it's a disservice. And as you can tell, it makes me angry.
Yeah, rightly so.
So again, arrogant, naive, brave, call it whatever you want. I just felt like, well, screw it. I mean, we're going to do this. And this was, the timing was terrible because it was pre-pandemic, right? So we do our beta of the academy and then COVID-19 happens, which was horrible. And we both had it. We landed both of us in a hospital. So we do this thing and it's at beta pricing, and then that hits, and then people are out of jobs, and then everybody is struggling. So we're like, okay, my thing was, I felt like I want to keep this at a reasonable level so that people can afford it. Because the other thought I had when I started it was, there are a lot of people who are completely priced out of this equation by universities, by boot camps, right? You heard me mention the price.
Yeah.
That literally is a gate. It keeps a lot of people outside the gates and says, no, you can't play because you can't afford this. That makes me angry. So the other idea behind UX365 always was that I want everybody to have a chance to play. I want to make this affordable enough that anyone can come in, right? And you need to make profit, obviously. But I was absolutely willing to operate at cost for a couple of years just to sort of prove it out and say, can we do it at this level and actually make it work? Because you don't know. You don't know what you don't know in terms of effort and cost and scope and all this kind of stuff. And how's it going to scale? I don't know. We got to figure it out. Fortunately, it was doable because we were able to keep that pricing and literally until this January, where I did have to finally increase the price, but even then it didn't increase much. Okay. We went to $199 for a year for basic membership and $299 for VIP, which gets you a group coaching, live group coaching session with me every month. And we do live workshops. This year I'm trying to do a live workshop every month.
Wow.
If I can. We'll see. And it's that kind of thing. I just felt like there's something lacking. So we're certainly doing all the fundamental stuff and principles and processes as well. But the larger emphasis is on stuff that I feel like people aren't getting anywhere else that they absolutely need.
You know, just so I was looking at your the whole courses, and so I'll give you some feedbacks. This is live feedback coming in from someone.
Cool.
So I see myself as someone who's in between in UX, right? So I've got like 8+ years of experience, right? So when I go into courses, I want specific stuff. So I want to know right now, because I'm dealing with that weird gray area between the leadership and me being the lead, and then how do I take the people, how do I take the vision, the mission from the top? So what are my roles? What are the part of design ops? So when I went there, I was like, can I somehow filter it by role? It's not about putting a button anymore. It's not about colors. It's not about type. It's way beyond that, right? It's about
absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I thought like that would bring in like such good value to people who can then somehow say like, okay, I am, 6+ years. Let me take these things, right? So it's just very quickly I can see exactly a cluster of.
Yep.
So I'm talking like a UX designer right now, maybe a user
and
from the user.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it seriously, because here's the deal. If you decide to put courses out into the world on your own platform, you basically have to choose an LMS of some sort.
Yeah.
That could be Podia. It could be Teachable, which is what we started on.
Yeah.
There are lots of other ones, right? There's something called Zenler. We looked at over the course of a year, we just migrated to a platform called Heights a year ago. I looked at 12 different platforms, which means we had to go so far as to set up a course on each platform to say, what's it like to set up and manage a course? What's it like for a student coming in to experience it? How much flexibility do they have in terms of how they navigate? How much flexibility do we have in terms of how we manage payment and subscriptions and recurrences and communication and notifications and all this other shit? It was painful. It's a very difficult year because here's the thing. They all suck. All of them. Every single one of them. If you're a UX person, if you're like us and you're hypercritical, they all suck. What you're doing is you're making a trade-off. You're saying, what things do I want the most? And which of these organizations seem at least responsive to growing and changing and being better? And the reason we chose Heights, which is probably the smallest organization of all of them, they're good human beings. They're a small team. They're responsive. There's never a time where you can't talk to somebody, and they are relentlessly changing, improving the features and functionality. All right. So is some of this where I want it to be? Like, for example, the searching, the filtering, the navigating, the ability to, we're getting there. All right. We're sort of on the cusp of that. And that's hopefully going to change by mid-year again. But believe it or not, they're further ahead than any of these other platforms in that area. As crazy as that sounds. So that's the thing. And I do spend time telling people this, because a lot of times students would be like, well, you're a UX guy. Like, why does this site work this way? This is the reality of the world. Okay. Yeah. Everything runs on a platform of some sort. Mm-hmm. There are constraints involved in that platform. So you're always trying to make a trade-off. There's certain stuff that is table stakes, absolutely has to be there in terms of functionality. And 9 times out of 10 with these platforms, that wins.
I think it's an excellent answer. And to be fair, it wasn't a criticism. It was just feedback, because I just thought,
no. I didn't take it. I'd
love to. Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't take it as such. I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about this kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. And it's sometimes, there's certain, to further have a point on that. So there's certain projects I've worked on and people are like, oh, but this is shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you don't understand the problems we were solving it. So maybe it's rhythm wasn't the issue here. The button radius wasn't the issue here. There were bigger business issues that we were trying to fix. The logic. It's a legacy software, for God's sake. It takes time and legacy. I'm sure you're working with government. You understand what legacy is.
Oh yeah.
And for me, the healthcare sector and all these big boys like
healthcare, finance, they're all 20-year-old systems.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the opportunity still lies for people to do some great stuff. But before we go too much into that, I'd like to talk about this, right?
Yes.
So it's a book, a second edition that you've co-written.
Yes.
Can you please tell us about this and the new book that is coming out?
Right. The user experience team of one. That version that you have in your hand was written by Leah Bewley over a decade ago. I read it when it came out. It was one of those books, and I say this all the time, where after I read it, I thought, I wish I had written this. Okay. I had the same reaction to Jesse James Garrett's, Elements of User Experience. Yeah. I had the same reaction to Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. Yeah. It's like, man, I wish I wrote this, because what all three of those people have in common is that they're taking a very, what's the word I want? Very generous, open, down-to-earth, practical approach that does not at any time talk over anybody's heads. Mm-hmm. Okay? It was written in plain language. It demystified all this stuff and said, look, here's how you do this. Here's what you're going to face. Here's how you deal with it. Here's how you unpack that complexity and make it easier. And I thought, man, this is brilliant. So everything in that first edition is very much in line with everything that has ever come out of my mouth over the last 30 years I've been doing this. So out of the blue, right? My wife and I are working on our own book about starting and running your own sort of independent, business for creative professionals. And we're kind of wrapping it up, right? We just got through editing and we're like, we got to figure out our promotional tour and release dates and all this kind of stuff. And out of the clear blue sky, I get an email from Lou Rosenfeld. And he says, hey, we're working on, we want to release a second edition of the UX Team of One. And I'm wondering, and I'm reading the sentence and I don't even finish reading the sentence. And my brain is going, yes, absolutely. I'm in right now. Yeah. Cause I'm like, this book, are you kidding me? Cause I was a huge fan of Leah, right? I mean, it's a brilliant book. And it's Rosenfeld, who I have incredible respect for, and they have a stable of authors who are all people I respect. And at this point, a lot of them are people that I know, or have met at the very least. So I was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do this. So it was an honor, first and foremost, to do this book. It was an absolute honor. And like you and I were talking before we started, to have Jesse James Garrett write the foreword was a full circle moment for me, because I was not, for what it's worth, I was not a Don Norman person. I really didn't know of Norman's existence till later in my career, which may sound crazy. But my first exposure to interaction design and UX was Jesse James Garrett and Alan Cooper. Yeah. Jesse's book changed my life. All right. There's no me without him. I say the same thing about Alan. There's no me without him. It's just not, it's never possible in any universe. So again, to have that happen and to have him be part of this, like, come on. But I love this book then and I love it now. And I think that even if you're not a UX team of one per se, I think that people in UX or product design are always kind of outgunned and outnumbered to some degree. I think you are always working in a situation where everything is less than perfect. I don't think, by and large, despite the stories you read online, we're given the time or the authority or the ability or the access or the support, right, to all the things that we need. Most folks I talk to in this profession are outnumbered by developers to the tune of like 20 to 1, right, or 12 to 1, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's never enough you. There's never enough time. There's never enough you. So what I love about this book is it gives you a collection of things, approaches, methods to say, look, in any given situation, you can use any one of these, right? It's a toolbox. And you're going to pull out what tool is relevant to what you're doing based on the situation, the circumstance, and the scenario. And again, it is all stuff that anybody can do. Anybody can get to this stuff. These exercises are not difficult.
Yeah.
They don't require any special prior skill or knowledge. They meet you where you are. And again, that's what I loved about the first book, and that's what I love about this book. What we wanted to do is sort of bring it up to date in a lot of ways. Because let's face it, the industry has changed a lot.
Yeah.
The way we do these things has changed a lot. There are a lot of methods and tools and processes that simply will not fly in an agile environment where everything's compressed into 2-week timelines, right? And the political side and the pressure side from the executive level down all the way to a product manager level has intensified beyond anyone's expectation or understanding. Okay, the business side of the house has changed radically in 10 years or 12 years or whatever, however long it's been since that first edition. And I felt like that needed to be addressed, right? My idea of this value loop had to be addressed. The political issues that you're going to run into had to be addressed. The title conflation and expansion and confusion around what the hell we do all day has increased. All right. And we have not done ourselves a lot of favors in that area. So as whether you're someone new coming into this field or whether you're an experienced practitioner who feels like all of a sudden the rug is pulled out from under you because you don't recognize anything around you, that to me is where the value of this book is. You've got a roadmap. You can say, all right, here's what's happening. I recognize that. I get that. Here's what I can do about it. All right. So in a nutshell, that's what I love about it. So I was really thrilled to put this thing out into the world. I'm very, very proud of it.
It's like because you spoke about rock, you spoke about music. So I was just thinking it's like a temple of a dog moment. I don't know if you're into, it's like Eddie Vedder coming together with.
You have no idea how much that analogy means to me. That album is right here in my heart.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah.
I think that was for us, that was a moment where everything, it became a full circle, right? And so, yeah, anyway, I can go on and on with you, Joe.
Here's another interesting music analogy,
Yeah.
okay? And I feel like that's part of the spirit of this book. You know, Leah tells a great story about how the first edition came about because she was in a situation where she felt like look, nobody has a roadmap for any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And she felt like it's kind of crazy that no one has a roadmap for any of this stuff. But I think that's why the book was as good as it was, because there weren't any hard rules or constraints, and she didn't have necessarily the formal baggage that comes along with being a practitioner for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the value. Like back to the music thing. I've tried to take lessons twice in my life. I failed both times. I just could not deal with the discipline for some reason. So I don't know notes. I don't know scales. If you asked me to play a certain note on a guitar, I wouldn't be able to do it. Mm-hmm. I literally know nothing. Everything I do is by ear. I do these weird drop tunings so that I kind of know my way around the fretboard, but I don't know what those notes or scales are. I'm composing music the hard way because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. But I think the end result of that is that you go about what you do in a very much more open way, exploratory way. You're very open to new input. You don't have any rigid ideas about how stuff is supposed to go. And it changes the way you do the thing, right? How I am as a consultant or an author or a speaker or a coach, I think benefits from that, in that I'm not rigidly attached to anything. I'm always ready to get new information. I'm always willing to be wrong. Right? I've said this before, and my thing is, in any situation, I either win or I learn. Both things are equally valuable. I know that sounds cliche. I don't mean it to, but it's the truth. It's the truth. Your career and how you go about it and how you feel about it, quite frankly, changes when you really sort of adopt that mindset.
I think this informal way of approaching problems, and where you're not restricting to a specific skill set per se, or a toolbox or
Never.
kit, and you're always open to just, okay, what is the best way to fix this problem? Maybe it's not a UX problem, maybe it's a stakeholder problem, right?
Yes.
Maybe it's an alignment problem. And
Yes.
and I hear you, because I was looking at some of your courses and I'm like, I'd love to go in and maybe validate some of the things that I've been doing, right? And so sometimes you need validation from someone who's seen more to give you the confidence to say, you know what, you're on the right path, mate. Yeah, you're doing okay. And, and maybe just do this. And it's almost like coaching per se.
Yes.
It's like a layer. But Joe, I'm mindful of the time, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I'd love to, in future, get more time from you, and I'll
Sure.
sort of disturbing you, and then we can deep dive into different things, right? Whenever you have the time. So,
Of course, I would be honored. This was wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.
thank you.
The Design Hustle Podcast.